Hi, everyone, and welcome back to the Guilt-Free Book Club. Really excited to have you with us and to have a fabulous guest author, Dr. Sarah Kuhn, with us this afternoon. We're going to be discussing her book, Thinking with Things, and I'm really looking forward to hearing from everyone. So let's do a quick go around and we can share who we are, what we're up to, and our interest in this topic of hands-on learning, which is the theme of our book club for this semester. So my name is Josh Luckens, and I work here at the Atlas Center at Wentworth, which is the Advancing Teaching, Learning, and Scholarship Center. And yeah, hands-on learning is one of Wentworth's kind of core, essential characteristics and traits. So when, I was introduced to Sarah's work, I thought that it was a brilliant way, to tie together some of what makes Wentworth really shine, that embodied learning, embodied cognition, experiential learning, hands-on learning, and all of the work that Sarah's done in this field. So yeah, why don't I turn it over to Sarah? You can introduce yourself and the book a little bit.
Sure. Um, I People ask me how long I worked on the book, which was published in 2021, and I say, well, in some ways, I started it in kindergarten because I was able to bring in a lot of things that were not part of my professional training. And in fact, really my experience in the classroom rather than my professional training is what led me to write the book. I do have a degree in urban studies and planning, but I was never one of the physical planning people. I was part of the social policy track in the planning profession. But I rubbed shoulders with designers. I'd always been interested in design, so that was part of what was going on with me. And I had been interested since early days in computing as an occupation and what was happening to computing. Anyway, it's in the book, but I think I had all of these things led to an epiphany. I taught for 30 years at UMass Lowell, and early on in my tenure there, I was teaching a sustainable development course, a subject in which I was not an expert, but it seemed essential that there be a course on this subject. And there were two of us who were very interested in teaching it. So we just pitched in. And I was doing a unit on city and suburban design, very quick intro. And the students had read a paper and seen a film about sprawl in Western cities. But there was a second paper that I wanted them to read and come to class to discuss. But when was pulling into the parking lot, I realized that I had not handed out the paper. This was before learning management systems, and you could just like post everything online. If you wanted them to read something that wasn't in a textbook, you had to photocopy it and hand it out. And you're nodding, Susanna. It's like, yes.
Or put it on reserve. But
Or yes, yes. Although we had a lot of
that's
commuter students, so I wasn't sure that was going to work. Yeah, and I realized I hadn't handed out the reading for that day. So here I was faced with 75 minutes of dead air. And I thought, well, what am I going to do? I had two young kids and I had a big tub of Lego in the back of my car. So I thought, I've always wondered what would happen if I brought this Lego into my classroom. Why don't I bring it in? And said, I have nothing to lose. So I did, and I had the students quickly sketch out a sustainable neighborhood with the Lego. And then we went around the room and each student talked about what they had built. And just the whole atmosphere in the room changed. People were more engaged, they were excited, it was fun, they were chatting with their neighbors. So that was wonderful. That was my first epiphany. And my second one was that I saw that they really hadn't learned anything from the film and the article that they read. Um, and then I gave them feedback and I asked them to revise what they had done and connect it to what other students had done. And that made some progress. But I saw that, we talk about active learning, but sometimes we just mean giving students clickers in large lecture classes. And that's sort of better than nothing in my view, but something that causes students to construct something actively that shows their knowledge, or in this case, their lack of knowledge, was really, really helpful and served to give me good feedback and sort of formative evaluation of what was going on in my class. So I continued to do these things, but it was very much against the grain of academia. My training is in social science, but I also collaborated a lot with people in engineering, some people in architecture at MIT, and so forth. And I looked for things that I could read that would explain to me why this was working and what was going on, and I couldn't find them. So I had to write the book that I wanted to read because it didn't seem like anyone else had written it. I discovered in that process the term embodied cognition, which is used by neuroscientists, and that seemed to be a really good hook, although it's not a term that a lot of people recognize. But that tapping into that literature was really helpful to me. And I was just trying to, make, as the subtitle of my book says, make a case for thinking with things in the college classroom. Well, that's quite enough. I think I'll stop there so we can talk.
Well, thank you so much. That was a great introduction to your kind of origin story and the book itself. And
Mm.
I look forward to diving deeper in a few moments. But I'd love to hear from Susanna and Jeffrey. Tell us a bit about what you're up to at Wentworth and your interest in this topic.
Yep. So I am a professor of biology, but most of my day life is scheduling classes for the sciences and humanities
Mm.
and supporting the students and the part-time faculty who teach them and take them. But in terms of thinking with things, I've done a little bit of science visualizations, and I've used a Miro board a couple of times, which
Mm-hmm.
is a remote way to kind of do that. And I did
Mm-hmm.
that as consciously for a program called ULab, the letter U lab, which is
Mm-hmm.
run out of a group at MIT, I think. Anyway, it's
Mm.
a systems change approach, and they have the group gathering, and their approach is to create a physical model, or in our case, it was a visual electronic one of what you want the system to look like at the end.
Mm.
And I found that very interesting and quite helpful. I have not done that in person yet, but
Hi, I'm Jeff Pingree. I'm a adjunct professor in the architecture department, and embodiment is kind of an important issue in architecture generally, and teaching it is quite difficult compared to all the visual methods we have of showing buildings. And also, my students are kind of reluctant to build lots of models when we urge them to. They always want to do just the final model, and they don't understand how much the design process is dependent on trial and error and iterative processes. So all of those are part of my interest in this. And I went to a book club on ludic pedagogy, which had some similar themes,
Oh,
which is
okay.
also very interesting. So the issue of embodiment is dear to my heart.
Well, I'm so glad that you're with us again, Jeff. Thanks for joining us. And since it's such a small group, maybe we can dive a little bit more specifically into your questions with Sarah. And also, just FYI for everyone, Sarah will be on Wentworth's campus at the end of October to do a hands-on in-person workshop We can tell you more about that at the end as well. So feel free to come to that. I think that'd be great. Lauren, we're all actually, your great timing. We're introducing ourselves, what we do at Wentworth, and our interest in this topic of thinking with things, hands-on learning, and embodied cognition.
Hi. Yeah, I'm Lauren Melfi. I'm an assistant professor in applied math, and um, I'm a bit of a regular at the book club. So I'll admit that some of it was just, hey, look, a book club event is coming up, and I'm going to show up to it, albeit a little bit late today. So, um, but um, let's see. I'm thinking ahead a little bit, and my two of my spring classes are multivariable calculus, and I've been interested for a while in working on some 3D printing or some other sort of physical visualizations of those 3D objects for multivariable calculus. So maybe that will be part of what I'm thinking about.
Very cool. Very cool.
Fantastic. Well, before we go any further, I'm just going to throw into the chat right here a link to our collaborative notes document, which if you didn't get a chance to look at the book too in depth, has a bunch of information that I've put together from the book just to give you a sense of some of the highlights. Sarah, we were talking before y'all came in, and she was like, that'd be good. If I saw that, I'd have a good sense of the book. So hopefully you'll appreciate it. I will
Well
also
done. Well
share.
done.
Thank you so much. Thank you. I'll also share the screen right here and just show you a couple of things. Of course, the book itself, Transforming Learning Through Tangible Instruction, The Case for Thinking with Things. This link is in the document itself, and there's also another link to an OER Commons Open Educational Resources, Thinking with Things page with a bunch of different resources that Sarah can tell us about later as well. But for the collaborative notes document itself, and the links are right there. This is just the introduction about what we were, the kind of focus for the reading. Here's those links right there. So in terms of the key concepts, Sarah in the book introduces 5 myths about learning in college in the first chapter. And then in the last chapter, chapter 7, 5 propositions to replace those myths that are kind of, based on all the research that she's done and her experience, obviously, in the classroom for many years as a professor of psychology at UMass Lowell. And then also some core theories that the book talks about, John Dewey, Piaget, and others, and some practical examples from a few different classrooms, physics, computer science, and engineering we can talk about as well as a bunch of discussion questions that I put together. So if any of those speak to you particularly, I was very interested in the notion of the studio classroom, taking some of the tools that architects use in their classical practice of education and applying them in disciplines that might be more traditionally lecture based. And obviously we have an architecture professor here, so it'll be interesting to have that cross-disciplinary conversation. And then a space for us to add our own takeaways. If you have anything you are finding particularly interesting, feel free to add your takeaways or add your discussion questions or whatever that might be. So as you take a look at the collaborative notes document, if anything comes up that you're like, oh yeah, I'd like to go deeper into that, or ask more about that, that'd be fantastic. But just for a starting point, maybe Sarah, you could tell us a little bit about those, kind of how you came up with those myths and how you came up with the kind of responses to those myths, the antidote to those myths that you feel are great practice for us to be taking forward into our classrooms.
It was a very long process of iteration, but when I started teaching more with things in the college classroom, I knew I was very much going against the culture, and that bringing Lego into a college classroom, especially, well, in any discipline, but again, I was a social scientist, so this is not what students were expecting. And I thought I really had to explain right up front on the first day what I was doing. I also had an icebreaker exercise with Lego, and that's described in the curriculum collection that I think you showed, Josh, but we can talk again about that. We've got embryonic collection of curriculum materials. But I started drafting this list of myths that I was trying to debunk, and I iterated on it at various times. It's certainly not a complete list or anything like that, but I tried to think about what was I countering in doing this? What were the presumptions that people had about what college learning was like that I thought were wrong and misleading? Um, and I talk about the conventional college classroom of lecture and students sitting and taking notes as the sensory deprivation chamber. And that if you don't do well in that environment, it does not mean that you are broken or stupid, but I think that's often what students think. Well, I'm struggling with this and it must be me because everybody else seems to be doing fine, which they are not. But we're asking them to perform an unnatural act, and some people are better at this than others. And of course, the people who turn into professors are the people who have survived that kind of pedagogy. Some people do better at that than others, and we're selecting on people who can tolerate the sensory deprivation chamber. And then we just reproduce it because we teachers, in the absence of prompts or encouragement to do otherwise, just teach as we were taught. So sorry, I'm not sure I answered the question, but and coming up, well, the five propositions at the end sort of track with the five myths. So I'm trying to figure out, what do we do to counteract these presumptions?
I'd love to hear more about some of the pushback you got, either from students or other faculty. Um, this is kindergarten stuff, that I mean, I think that's what alluded to in some of Josh's introduction. Um,
Sure,
so how
sure.
do you,
Well, so I mean, I had most of the time at the university, I had unusual freedom for various reasons that are not that interesting to go into. But or I was sort of operating at the periphery, so I wasn't under a magnifying glass.
Mhm.
Um, so I didn't get as much pushback as you might imagine. I remember having a student who was coming to work with me as a sort of research assistant tell me that a professor in her department had sort of mockingly said to her, "Oh, what, you're going to go work with her and play with Lego?"
Mhm.
Um, and there were times when I was teaching in a place where my colleagues would walk past my door frequently. And one of them looked in and said, "Oh, you're having way too much fun."
Mhm.
And I think it was, a combination of envy and trying to reinstate some of the academic guardrails and so forth. But a lot of the time I was just left to do my own thing. And I got very little pushback from students. Um, Now, I did, as I said, lay this all out at the very beginning at the first class. And I said, I hope that this appeals to you. You've now had a little taste of working with the Lego. But if you signed up for this course thinking that you'd be able to sit in the back of the room and rest up or check your email or something, then I don't think this class is for you
So
because
you do it like in the first class
yeah,
now? Okay. So
yeah,
that
yeah,
gives them
yeah.
at least a flavor for it then
Yeah, I
within
give them
our
I
add
give them
drop period and
a
stuff. Got
Lego
it.
icebreaker, and I introduce these five myths because I want
Yep.
them to understand why I'm doing this. That I know this is different, but this is why I'm doing this. This is what I believe. Um, and gosh, occasionally someone drops the course, but and I didn't track this, but my recollection is that it was just as frequent that at the second class, a student would return and they would bring their roommate or something and say, I told my roommate that I thought she would like this class, so can she join? So, I lost people, but I gained people. Um,
And you were very upfront about it. I guess that's the
I
other
was,
helpful thing.
because I thought, I don't want them wondering what's going on here. I just thought it is an unusual thing, and why not be clear about it? I have my reasons for doing this, and I might as well share them with the students. And if they like what they hear, that's wonderful, and they'll be, I think, more committed and less hesitant. And if they don't like it, it's the first class of the semester, so they can find something else.
I wonder how, and it's an elective, or is it required for a particular
This
program,
was a
or
gen ed course.
okay. So
So
I
it
wonder how
was,
that allows more freedom in some ways than something that anyway.
well, having it be, yeah, so yes, it wasn't a formal part of any particular curriculum. It was not
Mhm,
required, but I think it really helped me to get students that it was a gen ed
yeah.
course.
Mhm,
And it did also count, I think, toward the ethics requirement for computer science. So, as many sort of endorsements as you can get. And it was very purposely interdisciplinary too. It was
mhm,
focused on environmental, social, economic problems, and we did some reading about those, particularly in the first half of the course. And then in the second half of the course, students actually did hands-on projects working with a partner. And there's a description of um, the Designing the Future World was the name of the course that I taught most frequently toward the
mhm,
end. Um, in this process, I'd say in sort of the middle of my 30 years, as I was working on this thinking with things stuff, I was also giving talks about using the model of the design studio in architecture in other fields. There was an
mhm.
experimental course at MIT for which I was the sort of documenter and evaluator that was focused on software design, but again, using the pedagogical methods of the architecture studio. And I think that gave me more confidence about thinking about this as kind of a studio approach to teaching outside of fields that have a studio practice. So,
I'd
I have
love
more
to,
questions, but go
yeah, I'd
ahead.
love to get back to Jeff's question about, even within a studio model, traditional studio model where there is, about bunch more hands-on active learning going on than in maybe just a passive lecture setting, there's still some resistance to embodiment and also some ways in which for the students it's easier to picture kind of two-dimensional physic imagery rather than the embodied experience of a person in a space, for example. So yeah, I mean, Jeff, yeah, do you want to say more about what you're facing, what you're thinking about, and maybe Sarah can bring in some of the ideas from the book to help address your issue.
Actually, I'm kind of interested in knowing exactly what you taught and exactly how you played with it. What kind of tools did you use? So, the specifics are interesting to me, especially if they're cross-disciplinary.
sure, sure. Well, I want to jump right in on the architecture thing, if I may, and then if I don't come back to the Lego, please let me know. And also, for real kind of concrete specifics about what to do in the classroom, that curriculum lesson bank on OER Commons, the Thinking with Things group, I think will be really helpful to you because I do describe both the icebreaker exercise and some other things that I do in the classroom. And a few other people have contributed to that also, because your question is one that I get a lot. Like people say, okay, I'm buying this argument, but what do I do tomorrow in class? Um, anyway, um, in terms of getting students to build and iterate, there's a professor at Miami University of Ohio. His last name is Reynolds, and he teaches in the architecture department. He uses a lot a set of blocks that were originally designed by the 19th century educator Friedrich Froebel, but sort of small wooden blocks that can be easily manipulated. And he has students build and iterate with that. So I think my experience is that to get people started, to get students started, the simpler the materials are, the better. And I see that Lauren has used pipe cleaners for multivariate calculus, and I'm dying to hear more about that. But, very simple. Oh my gosh, look at that. Very simple craft materials that can be, and, Lego's not good for everything, but it is good for sort of quick iterations as long as students aren't, building some very large structure. But even, children's blocks that don't stick together and can be very easily configured and reconfigured is my sort of impulse in terms of getting them to build things.
The pipe cleaner example reminds me of the example you shared in the book of crocheting those kind of what was it, linear planes
The
and
hyperbolic plane,
hyperbolic
yeah,
planes. And
yeah,
it's
that's
this like
so.
very abstract, mathematical concept, but it's like actually having to construct it, make it, manipulate it, help students understand it in a very hands-on practical way that's way different from just conceptualizing in the head.
Well, and Lauren, you may be familiar with this, but I discovered there's this whole stream of mathematical art, and so many crafts are mathematical. We just don't think of them this way. I mean, I was one of those people who just hated my math education. I think I would have liked math better if I hadn't had a math education because it taught me that math is routine and boring and it's about arithmetic and all kinds of things. And when I discovered the crocheted hyperbolic plane, that really changed my attitude toward math and my taste for math. Um, but yeah, there's a lot of math art around that's really amazing.
I wanted to maybe explore or suggest a parallel about the iterative process that Jeffrey mentioned. Um, I think I don't teach it, but what I hear from our English and writing faculty is that students are not used to doing drafts and revising things. So I wonder how that's similar, and what mental shift do you think comes from students being encouraged to create something that's only a first round kind of thing, if anything, right? Because I think it's a more substantial or pervasive idea that I have to have it perfect from the beginning.
Jeff, do you have thoughts on that?
Well, that's, I think, exactly the issue. I mean, the other problem we have is we have computer modeling now, which is a great tool, and they need to learn it. But a computer model you edit. A physical model you tear apart and put back together, or make two or three versions at a smaller scale, or take blocks and put them together. And the computer model, that's just something they want to edit. But they do have this problem, and it's kind of hard to break them of it, that they want to start working on the final presentation, and they don't have a design yet.
Yeah.
So you
Yeah.
got to break them of that. I sometimes say, make a model of your scheme in 30 minutes. And they don't have a scheme yet. They've just got the program. They got to just do it.
Mm-hmm.
That sometimes helps break them of that habit. Or starts, several students, I think, respond very positively to that. Say, hey, look, I can make something in 30 minutes that's actually
Mm-hmm.
viable. Yeah, it's kind of a constant struggle.
So, Jeff, to finish answering your question, the icebreaker that I do with Lego on the first class, I give them 5 minutes to build.
All right,
So
yeah.
yeah, and they can do it. Um, I say build something that will help you tell us about who you are as a student, or build something that will tell us about what your favorite learning environment is. And it can be metaphorical. It doesn't have to be literal, and you can't get very literal with Lego anyway. And they have 5 minutes, so they have to act fast. I say, don't overthink it. I'm not grading them on it, which I think also helps. It takes away some of the pressure. And then we go around the room, and each person talks about what they built, and everybody's construction is different, even though they had the same set of stuff to begin with. But I really believe in this very rapid iteration, especially at the beginning, to get them used to iterating and refining. And fortunately, I don't think because they're not used to using Lego in college, they don't have preconceptions the way they might about
Hmm.
like uh, writing something,
Hmm.
that it has to be perfect at the beginning. Of course, AI can't do it for them either. And if they're busy with Lego, they're not on their phones. So I rarely had a phone problem in my class because people's hands were busy.
But in the example that you started with, Sarah, you help them revise it in real time based on developing or remembering a previous topic.
Yes,
Right.
yes.
And
And
so that's an interesting thing. I wonder how to build that more often in. And they were all doing them individually, right? In that point.
initially, yeah, you mean when they were building the sustainable neighborhood?
Hmm.
Yes, yes. Initially, they were all building their own thing. And then I said, okay, remake it. And if you can connect it to your neighbor's stuff, or to,
Okay.
make a community or communal public transit or something like that,
Hmm.
great. And by that time, they all knew what everyone had built. I mean, Jeff, because I thought about this software architecture studio stuff, I mean, one of the things that I thought I learned about architectural pedagogy was that there is a culture of critique. And so expecting to get feedback. So I felt like that was what I was doing in the sustainable Lego situation.
Yeah, that's a actually I think that's an important part. I think you've touched on something very important. Um, and I know in my own education, as well as I see to my students, they think answers are right and wrong.
Oh, yeah.
And so you really condition them to be critiqued. And that can happen. I mean, I think we've got a very good faculty here, and so that seems to happen pretty quickly. But to encourage critiques and to have the students be eager for them uh,
Mhm.
is definitely a good thing to sort of uh, to have. Yeah.
I've posted most of the things that I've ever written in my academic career on ResearchGate, and I have a couple of articles about the software design studio. One is less detailed but has images. The other is more detailed. But if that is of interest to you, it's trying to think about what studio education generally outside of architectural education might look like. What are the characteristics from based on observing this software design studio? What were the characteristics, and also what were some of the pitfalls? And one of the pitfalls at MIT was that, just as you said, Jeff, that the students wanted to go right away into doing the finished thing. So they just went back to their computers and started coding. And this was a one-off course, and we did not enforce various kinds of iterations. So when I put together the half semester project in my Designing the Future World class, I really enforced iteration. First you had to choose a partner, and then you had to submit something to me telling me who your partner was and what 3 topics you and your partner were interested in. And then the next week it was, give me a sort of a informal sketch of how you might pursue one of these, and then you do a PowerPoint with your partner. So you can't rush into implementing the final thing because I've made all of these intermediate steps and milestones. So thinking with things can be very small, like 5 minutes and then a discussion, or it can be a half semester or a semester. It happens at all different scales. But I found that causing students to create something, and it could even be, I mean, this was not my favorite thing, but sometimes students created informational booklets rather than a device, depending on what topic they had chosen. But at least they had to synthesize things and make a proposal and take action rather than just analyze something.
Yeah, I'm feeling very encouraged about time-based exercises. Also, and maybe I'll shorten the time period. But no, I've got a bunch of ideas that I'm sort of thinking of based on some of the suggestions you've made. But I almost feel like you want to rush them to these things so they can stop thinking.
Yeah. Right.
Think themselves out in the
yeah. Don't overthink this.
Yeah.
I mean, I hope that all of you can come to my in-person presentation, but one of the things that I say, because I hand out those materials in my workshop, and it's really interesting to see faculty interacting with Lego. That's very cool. And they get really excited generally. But I also have to say, I give them 5 minutes to do something, and I have to say, don't overthink this. Just dive in and see where your hands take you.
There's a group and a workshop that Accelerate has done. They have that's our makerspace.
Yes, well, it's your entrepreneurship program also, right? I was looking at the website. It sounds really interesting.
But we did a team building thing as a group. We built a car and there's a ramp, and then you iterate, can you make it go faster or slower? So in that particular example, it was expected to have some iteration. And I don't know whether, a performance-based or some activity, makes one think about iteration sooner in that particular case. I don't know. I've got other things we can talk about, but I was just remembering that and it's not just Legos, there's weights and of course wheels because they're gonna do something on a ramp. So I don't know whether that's part. So I'm curious, sort of 2 questions. How does having this change? Maybe it doesn't, but I was wondering how it changes or advances or expands your learning objectives in the class, with or without the activity. And then what skills do you think doing the activity the students gain by it? I mean, I can imagine sort of
yes,
regular heady kind of things, but is there a particular skill that like an accreditor might say, yeah, that's a skill that's, and maybe model building for architecture is a good example. I'm just thinking more generally. So,
well, there's a lot of talk about design thinking, and I feel like that's squarely in this. Of course, social scientists mostly don't talk about that, but this is squarely in that bailiwick. I mean, it really depends on how sophisticated and broad-minded your accreditors are, I think, too, whether they will recognize this. But Uh, one of the most influential experiences that I ever had was when I first experimented with putting these sort of working with physical materials in the classroom. After I was already doing the Lego thing, but I had a close friend who was a colleague in the computer science department. He had been at the MIT Media Lab and done a lot of the early research and development work on the product that became Lego Mindstorms. So he was interested in very simple robotics and pedagogy, things that could be used with middle school and high school kids. And he had a lab, and we got a very tiny grant to incorporate a hands-on building piece in his lab into my sustainable development course. So I sort of compressed the normal part of the course and left 3 weeks at the end of the semester for my students to go into Fred's lab with me, of course. And they were told that they needed to make some kind of interactive prototype that would address a problem in sustainable development, either something that would, make a direct intervention or something that would educate people. And we talked about concept prototypes like concept cars, something that would not be ready for mass production, but would be something that exhibited interactive behavior because they were using Fred's microprocessors and circuits and actuators and so forth. So it had to behave in some way. Um, and the students loved it, and some students who were struggling in the earlier part of the course really shone in the lab, and everybody came up with something. And then after the course was over, I stopped in at Fred's lab, and two of his students who had taken my course were hanging out there. And I said, I turned in my grades and everything. I said, well, what did you think about adding this 3-week module to the course? Would you have learned more if I just made it the regular course without this 3-week module? And they said, well, I don't think that we learned any less, but I think by having the module there, we learned that we could do something about these problems.
Mm.
And I was just knocked out by that answer because I'd been working with the other person who taught a section of this course. Students had said, first of all, when we first started doing it, they said, "Oh my God, we just end up so depressed because we learn about all these problems. So please tell us about what people are doing about these problems." So we did revise the course to have a lot more of that in it. And I thought that that would show them that they could do something about it, but it didn't because they did not see themselves in people who were in movies or, those other successful people. We're just the munchkins. I don't know. You do know what I'm saying? That um, they they thought, well, this isn't me because I could never accomplish something like that someone would want to make a movie about. But by doing this little exercise, it forced them to think about, well, what would I really want to do something about? And what might I do? And in 3 weeks, you can't get very far at all. But we were able to take them through a process in which they had something. That we had a robot that would, roam around in the woods and sense moisture and then drop a seed in places where the moisture was conducive. And of course, this thing was built with Lego. It wouldn't, and some sensors, it would not have lasted a minute in an actual forest, but it was again a concept prototype.
But that's the embodied part of it, isn't it? Embodied solutions, in a sense, right? They've
Yeah.
embodied themselves as problem solvers that on big
Well,
problems.
yeah, I mean, it's sort of self-image of
Hmm.
self as
Hmm.
problem solver, but
Hmm.
also, making something, usually something three-dimensional
Hmm.
in the world. And Jeff, I feel your pain. I think dimensional thinking, 3D thinking is really, really lacking in students. One of the saddest things I ever heard was talking to a preschool teacher in Western Mass, and she said, I have students who can stack blocks on the iPad, but they can't do it in real life.
Mhm.
And I thought, oh my God.
Very funny. It's also my experience.
Yeah.
I think the other thing
Well,
you're bringing up that I think is really important is this may be a little bit off topic, but we live in a kind of celebrity culture. People are always casting themselves in these celebrities of whoever it may be, and so there's a kind of self-actualization that has to go on. Even in my course, students often ask me what to do. And I say, well, that's for you to figure out. So
yeah,
it's like
yeah.
just important that they understand, it's not for me to tell you what to do, it's for you to figure out what to do. And that kind of self-actualization, I guess I would call it, is, really important to the learning process. So I think that's a really useful thing to bring up.
One of the things that Josh pulled out in his great collaborative notes was an experience that I had focusing on textiles and fiber arts as a way of teaching STEM concepts was just a 1 year project that I am very excited about, but we only got a year of funding and then things didn't continue. But I think we had proof of concept. And one of the things that happened as a result of that, we had a woman who taught machine knitting at Rhode Island School of Design for a decade. She was one of the artists who was part of the team. And she brought in a whole bunch of scraps, samples from her knitting machine. And one of the engineering professors took it back to his lab where he was teaching about the concept of shear, stretch in different direct. And he'd been using these standardized plastic sheets, and the students were supposed to use a gauge to test them. And instead of the plastic sheets, he started using these knitted fabrics, which so visibly distorted that students could get a much better feel for what shear was. But then also, they were all using different samples with different characteristics. So they couldn't go to Chris and say, well, here's the answer I got. Is this right or wrong? Uh, he would say, well, I don't know. It depends on the material that you were using. Tell me what your process was. So, the rightness of what they came up with came from whether they were following the appropriate process to get the answer they got.
Love to write that one up as a case study in science if it hasn't already been written up,
No. So, yeah, let me know.
because that's a website I use at the National Science Teachers Association.
Oh,
And I'm also a knitter and a crocheter. So different yarns sources have different responses, physical responses to things. So
so Susanna, will you please reach out to me and I will, because I actually have some data from that too. I'm not
perfect.
sure how good it will be, but from their performance on the exam and so forth. And I just haven't done anything with it, but would
Yeah, no, I think that would
happy.
be a great resource. And I'm
Wonderful.
talking anyway. Yes,
Well, really quick, while we're back to the topic of yarn and art, and I was wondering if Lauren, you had anything you wanted to share, add about using that in the context of teaching mathematics.
About yarn specifically or about
Just
what
manipulables, using those, yeah, that example
my
or
my
any.
pipe my pipe cleaners are really uh my most manipulable thing that I think I've done probably, although I might be forgetting some stuff. Um in I thought to use them from the perspective of like you're looking at trying to visualize weird 3D surfaces. And one of the ways that we do that is by taking slices of them and saying, well, what shape does that slice look like? What shape does that slice look like? What do the level
Mhm.
curves look like? And I was like, we could make all of those things. And if one person, so what I had with this activity was I had one person take one color, in this case, green maybe, and look at the slices in one direction, and somebody else in the group would take a different color and look at the slices in the other direction. And then in theory, when they took each of what each of them did, they would be able to lay them out across each other in a mesh. And then if there was a third person, that third person would take a third color and maybe do the level curves as well. And there was definitely there were some students that were like, okay, fine, I'm playing along, but this is an arts and crafts day that I didn't ask for. And some of them had more fun with it, and really enjoyed it. But it ended up, it feels like it is kind of in a weird spot because that particular topic we don't end up doing as much with as I would like level curves, yes, but the slices in other directions don't end up being as much of a build off of this. And so while the activity was interesting, it's hard to quantify how doing that played into the next few topics. It's been, I actually haven't taught multivariable since I did this set that gave me these two that I'm rolling around, but I've been thinking about 3D printing for a while, given that we do have the makerspace on campus, with the 3D printing capabilities.
But do you think that does the same thing? Putting a 3D printing into
Well, there might still be some interesting thought processes thinking about how you have to have a slicer tackle the question of how it's going to build that 3D print. I think there's still maybe some room for that. Plus a little bit of, I think it would change the buy-in equation for the students, because the same ones who are looking at pipe cleaners and going, well, it's pipe cleaners, right? It's arts and crafts. That kind of reaction might have a different reaction to, it's a 3D printer, and that's
right. So the pipe cleaners could be step one, and
not
the 3D print.
I was not saying that one or the other. Not saying that one or the other is better. Just that it's going to change who buys in and how, I think. Yeah. So these I think are my most tangible manipulables that I've done stuff with in class. I remembered some other modular origami that I have floating around in my office, but I don't teach the type of math that would focus on these kinds of things. So they're more just art pieces in my office right now. But I get very physical myself when I teach. And so one of the things that I'm thinking about is what would it look like to get my students being more physical when I'm talking about, a differential equation that describes velocity. That's motion. I can talk about them knowing what motion is and what it looks like for me doing that at the front of the classroom. But I don't get them up and moving as much as I might. So that's a thought process that I'm having.
I got to go to my next meeting. So Sarah, you're at UMass Lowell. Got it. Okay. Yep.
Yeah. Although you'll get to me. Let me put this in the chat. You'll get to me more quickly at my sorry.
As Sarah's putting that in the chat, I also put a link in the chat to the registration for the program on October 28th from 12:30 to 2 in the CEIS lobby. So feel free to register for that as well. And there's Sarah's email.
There's my email, and my website is thinkingwiththings.com, not surprisingly. So,
and that's one of the resources linked in the collaborative notes as well, is the website for the book, Thinking with Things.
And I have a blog if you would like to subscribe. So promise not to spam you. But thanks, Susanna. Let's talk about
yes. Yep. I will reach out to you, and I will send you the link to the site. The other one I did Lauren. I don't know if you've heard of DNA computing or DNA origami. So I use that as a way I used a ribbon and had the students working with a ribbon. So now I
Mhm.
realize that I have used thinking with things with a small group of students. So,
I'd love to have your contributions, all of you, to also the OER Commons site. I've tried to make it simple to put things in. It's not a very elaborate process, but these sound like awesome ideas.
thank you very much. I look forward to seeing you in about a month.
Thank you.
Thanks for coming, Susanna. Great to see you. And yeah, thanks for coming, Jeff and Lauren. As we wrap up, do either of you want to share any, last thoughts or takeaways or anything that you're just in conclusion?
I just want to thank both Josh and Sarah for a very interesting talk and setting it up. And I'm very eager to look at some of the material you've presented. So I'll be looking forward to that.
Thank you, Jeff. And I would love to hear from you. And if I get to see you in person, all the better. But please don't hesitate to email me and we can start a virtual conversation too. Thanks
Okay.
very much
I
for
do have
coming.
your email, so I do have your email, so
Yeah, wonderful. Wonderful.
What Jeff said. Thank you. It's always interesting to talk
Pleasure.
about more ideas.
Pleasure. Love your pipe cleaners.
Thanks.
Fantastic. Well, thanks again to all of you for being here and to Sarah for being our special guest. And hopefully we'll get a chance to do some hands-on stuff together in late October. Thanks
Wonderful.
again.